Before diving into this incredible story, consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the bell. Every story here has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. Sir, can I wake your daughter up? These words from a homeless girl shocked the whole world. On a frigid morning in Chicago, a sharp wind swept through the gray streets, making snowflakes dance in the winter air. Inside the Northwestern Memorial Hospital, the corridors were filled with the lingering smell of antiseptic, the hurried footsteps of medical staff, and the hushed whispers of families consumed by anxiety. But in one of the halls on the third floor, the atmosphere was different. Heavy. Almost frozen. A woman, curled up on a plastic bench, wept silently, her shoulders trembling under a coat too light for the season. It was Emma Anderson, the mother. Her tears flowed freely, tracing bright furrows down her pale cheeks. She clutched a crumpled child's drawing in her hands, a clumsily colored son, with 3 little men holding hands, Dad, Mom, and Lily. Right next to it, standing in front of a large bay window, a man in a dark suit remained motionless. It was Richard Anderson, her husband. A household name, respected in business circles, at the head of a technology empire. But right now, he was anything but a confident tycoon. His dark-rimmed eyes stared at the hospital bed with a painful intensity. His normally closed and proud face betrayed a deep, naked, almost childlike distress. On the other side of the glass, in a sterile room bathed in a pale light, lay Lily, their only daughter. 8 years old, she had her mother's long, light brown hair and her father's strong chin. But now, she seemed absent. Inert. Her eyelids closed, she was hooked up to a whole humming machinery, electroencephalograms, IVs, a ventilator. The slightest beep made Emma flinch. It had 14 days that Lily hadn't opened her eyes. It all started suddenly. A simple fever. One morning, she said she was cold. By evening, she was delirious. The next day, she was unresponsive. The first doctors spoke of an aggressive virus, then of meningoencephalitis. Antibiotics, antivirals, and corticosteroids were tried. Specialists from Boston and New York were called. Even a Japanese expert, contacted by satellite, attempted to propose a protocol. But nothing. No treatment worked. Brain scans showed no irreversible damage. Her heart was beating normally. Yet the child remained in a deep coma, as if her soul had fled elsewhere. Richard, he had stopped at nothing. He had put all his business on hold. He had chartered private jets to bring in medical luminaries. He had even offered a reward, often $1 million, to anyone who would find a solution. But the doctor's silence was always the same: we are doing everything we can. As the days passed, the glimmer of hope faded. Emma's gaze gradually became empty. And Richard, a man accustomed to controlling the future with strategic decisions, felt powerless for the first time. He would have given his entire fortune to see his daughter smile again. To hear her little voice once again asking him to tell her a bedtime story. There had been a particularly difficult night 2 days earlier. Emma, at the end of her tether, had shouted at the doctors. Richard had smashed a chair against a wall in a moment of simmering rage. And since then, not a word. Just this stifling wait. That day, the sky was overcast, a dense, menacing gray. A light snow was falling on the hospital forecourt, covering the parked cars and sidewalks with a cold veil. Richard, at his wits' end, went outside to get some fresh air, unable to stay locked in that lifeless room for another minute. He needed to breathe, or at least try. His open coat flapped against his legs, but he paid no attention. He looked up at the sky as if searching for an answer, a direction, a sign. But all he saw was a world deaf to his pain. He leaned against the hospital wall, his eyes watering, his features drawn. The silence was crushing him. His mind swirled, saturated with thoughts, memories of Lily running in the garden, of her singing voice in the car, of her arms throwing themselves around his neck. Until a voice, faint but clear, suddenly cut through the frozen air. "Sir," someone said hesitantly but determinedly, "I can wake up your daughter." Richard blinked, thinking he'd misheard. He turned his head and saw a figure approaching him. She was a teenager. Barely 14 or 15, but her eyes seemed to bear years of suffering. Her face was smeared with dust, her cheeks reddened by the cold, and her brown hair, matted, peeked out from under an oversized hat. She wore a worn army jacket, much too big for her, and her torn shoes revealed wet socks. In her arms, she clutched an old backpack, as if it contained everything she owned in the world. Richard, taken aback, looked her up and down. He was about to ignore her, to shoo her away, thinking she was a beggar who had come to pity him for money. But something in the way she stared at him, a strange gravity in her gaze, froze him. "What did you say?" he asked hoarsely, his jaw clenched. The girl, without looking away, repeated calmly, "I can wake your daughter up." And then, as if that wasn't enough to unsettle him, she added, "Her name is Lily, right?" Richard felt a cold chill creep up the back of his neck. His legs almost buckled. He stared at her in disbelief. "How do you know his name?" he growled defensively. The girl didn't move. "I heard it in your heart," she said in a calm voice, "that I know how you feel. I feel the pain as if it vibrates around me. I know when a soul is still there, even if everyone thinks it's gone. I have this gift. Always. And sometimes, when I touch someone, they wake up." A heavy silence fell. Around them, people had stopped, intrigued by the unlikely exchange. Some passers-by watched the scene skeptically. A nurse coming out for a break cast a curious glance. Two medical students exchanged a mocking smile, then shook their heads, murmuring, "Another crazy person." But Richard wasn't laughing. He stared into the girl's eyes. They were a clear, almost translucent green. Not the eyes of a manipulator. Not the eyes of a liar. He saw something raw, pure, almost mystical in them. A naked truth. "Are you kidding me?" he breathed. "It's cruel. If you're just trying to." "I don't want anything," she cut in softly. "That I haven't eaten in 2 days, but I don't want anything from you. I'm just here because I felt her. She wants to come back. But she needs a connection. And I can be that connection." The sincerity in her voice disarmed Richard. This wasn't a staged scene. She wasn't a delusional beggar or an attention-seeking con artist. She was a child. A broken child, but one who deeply believed in what she was saying. He closed his eyes and inhaled slowly. He remembered the doctor's blank stares, their mechanical words, their scientific resignation. He had tried everything. He had nothing left to lose. "If you lie," he said coldly, "I'm getting you out of here. And trust me, I can do it." She simply nodded. "But if you're telling the truth, then come on. Try it." And with a sudden movement, he turned and pushed open the glass door of the hospital, without looking back. Behind him, the snowflakes continued to fall. And Hope, her arms tightly wrapped around her bag, followed suit. Hope followed Richard through the long corridors of the pediatric ward. Her steps were slow, almost hesitant, but her gaze remained steady and focused. The ambient noise seemed to fade around her, the beeping of monitors, the low voices of the nursing staff, the distant cries of another child. Everything faded. She saw only the white door at the end of the corridor, marked with the name, Lily Anderson, Chamber 317B. A doctor was waiting for them in front. Tall, wiry, his brows furrowed behind his glasses, he looked skeptical and slightly annoyed. "Mr. Anderson," he said quietly, "please, this is not a good idea. I understand your pain, but—" "Let her go," Richard said, his voice firm and calm, without even looking at him. "Just, let her try." The doctor clenched his jaw, then sighed before gesturing toward the nurse. "Very well. But I'm staying. If she tries anything dangerous." Hope didn't answer. She went inside. The atmosphere in the room was almost unreal. The hum of the machines seemed to slow. The air was cool, almost icy, and smelled of sterile plastic and medicine. In the center, in a bed with squared sheets, little Lily Anderson seemed to be sleeping, but a terribly distant sleep. Her pale, almost transparent cheeks contrasted with the vivid colors of the drawings hanging on the wall. A small teddy bear lay beside her, like a silent guardian. Hope approached slowly, without a word. Each step echoed like a silent prayer. She didn't look at the doctor, the nurse, or even Richard, who remained behind the glass. Her full attention was focused on the child. Arriving at the foot of the bed, she gently placed her backpack on the floor, as if the slightest noise could break the fragile balance of this room. Then she approached the head of the bed. She took a deep breath. Her hands were shaking slightly. She held them tightly for a moment, closed her eyes, then reached out her palm toward Lily's icy forehead. The contact was immediate, intimate, charged with an invisible tension. Hope placed her hand, tiny and calloused, on the girl's forehead. She closed her eyes again, and her lips began to move. She wasn't speaking English. Not French either. Her words were whispered, like an ancient breath, a language forgotten by the modern world. No one could understand what she was saying, but the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The doctor, arms crossed, frowned. The nurse remained motionless, mouth half open, her gaze fixed. Then, silence became heavy. Denser than before. As if even the machines had gone into standby, suspended. And bit faster. Then another one. The heart rate monitor suddenly changed. The trace, at first irregular, resumed a more lively, clearer rhythm. And then, something tiny. A shudder. Lily's left eyelid twitched. Her fingers barely moved. Then, her lips. A breath. "Papa," she whispered weakly. The nurse let out a cry of shock. The doctor, pale, dropped his file, its pages flying to the floor. He rushed to the machines, incredulous. On the other side of the window, Richard saw his daughter speaking. For a moment, he thought he was dreaming. Then his legs gave way. He opened the door and ran into the bedroom, his heart pounding like never before. "Lily. My darling. Daddy is here." He knelt on the ground, grabbed his daughter's frail hand, and brought it to his lips. Tears flowed freely, uncontrollable. He laughed, cried, repeated her name like a mantra. Lily opened her eyes wider, her pupils clinging to the light. But in the back of the room, Hope was backing away. Discreetly. Like a shadow. She watched the scene, unsmiling, with a strange, almost painful tenderness. She knew her role was over. Silently, she retrieved her bag, walked to the door, and left without anyone stopping her. She was found about 10 minutes later, sitting alone on an icy bench outside the hospital. The wind had picked up, whipping her face, but she seemed peaceful. She stared at the sky, expressionless. Richard, still panting, finally joined her. He still bore the marks of shock in his eyes, but also infinite gratitude. He sat down next to her, not saying a word for several seconds. Then he whispered. "Who are you, really?" Hope looked down. She rubbed her hands together, as if to ground herself. "I don't know. I've always been like this. When I was little, other children thought I was strange. My mother, she left me one day. I never saw her again. People are scared. Some think I'm a witch, others that I'm crazy. So I hide." Richard looked at her for a long time. There was no manipulation or madness in this child. Just a light, mysterious, unexplained, but real. "You'll never sleep outside again," he said suddenly, with protective firmness. "You're coming with me. You're part of the family now." Hope looked up at him. For the first time, they shone with a tear. But she didn't cry. She simply nodded. And, for the first time in years, she stood up without running away. In the days that followed, the story spread faster than light. It all began with a social media post by a still distraught nurse. She emotionally described the scene she had witnessed, a homeless girl placing her hand on the forehead of a comatose child, and waking her up, as a doctor watched in disbelief. The post went viral within hours. The television news picked up the story. The miracle child and the teenager who came from nowhere, ran the CNN headline. Talk shows picked up on the story. Entire networks offered special reports. Journalists delved into Hope's past, trying to understand where she came from, who she was. They discovered that she had lived in shelters, that she had fled abuse, that she had slept in train stations, in parks, in abandoned squats. But no one was ever found to explain what she had done that day. The scientific community got involved. Renowned neurologists traveled to Chicago to examine Lily's case, take samples, and analyze the results. Nothing in the data could explain such a revival. Her brain, previously in a state of profound slowdown, had simply rebooted. Theologians also came. Some spoke of a divine manifestation, of an angel sent to earth. Others remained cautious, evoking the mystery of faith. It may be a miracle, Reverend Paul Mason said on national television, but the real miracle is that we listened to her. Hope, for her part, categorically refused interviews. She disliked cameras, the spotlight, and empty promises. She stayed in the background, protected by the only person she trusted, Richard Anderson. He wasn't looking for glory or explanations. He knew what he'd seen. He knew his daughter had whispered, "Daddy," the exact moment Hope laid her hand on her. And that was enough. Within a few weeks, he began the legal process to officially adopt Hope. It wasn't easy, the lack of identity papers, a legal guardian, or a school record, but nothing could stop Richard. He mobilized his lawyers, his contacts, and his resources. And soon, a new identity card was issued. Hope Anderson, 14, legally became his daughter. Richard gave him more than just a roof over his head or a family name. He gave him a loving family, a carefully decorated room of her own, a dog adopted on her birthday, a library subscription, and mornings when she was no longer afraid to wake up. He enrolled Hope in a private school, where she followed a special program. At first, she remained withdrawn, shy, and silent. She had spent too many years in the shadows to suddenly open up. But little by little, she learned to smile, to have confidence, to stand up for herself without running away. A gentle and patient therapist helped her put words to her wounds, to her abandonment, to this gift that she did not understand. "You know," the psychologist told him one day, "you don't always need to understand for something to be true. Sometimes just existing is enough to change a life." Hope didn't answer, but that day she came home and hugged Lily tighter than ever. Meanwhile, America, fascinated, continued to debate. Some scientists offered to study Hope in the lab. Institutions wanted to offer her scholarships, and foundations wanted her to become an ambassador. But Richard set a clear limit. "She's a child. Not an experiment. She's not here to explain the inexplicable, but to live. She deserves that right, just like everyone else." Hope, true to form, declined the honors. She was neither a saint nor a prodigy. She wanted neither the spotlight nor trophies. She wanted to read quietly in her room, walk in the park with Lily, and have a real birthday. She simply wanted to be free. And if some people reduced it even further to the homeless girl who woke up a child in a coma, those who saw it that day knew it was much more than that. She was the miracle no one saw coming. She was the answer to a wordless prayer. She was hope incarnate. And as one journalist said in a now famous editorial, "You never know where a miracle will come from. Sometimes it wears rags. Sometimes its name is simply hope."